When my girlfriend looked at me across the kitchen island and said, "I don't love you anymore," she expected a reaction. She expected anger, maybe even desperation. Instead, I simply nodded. Okay. Then I picked up my jacket and walked out of the apartment. The elevator doors closed slowly in front of me, while her shocked face disappeared behind them. What she didn't know was that 3 days earlier, I had already learned something that made walking away the easiest decision of my life. My name is Adrian Whitfield, and my girlfriend's name was Lillian Davenport. If you live anywhere near North Scottsdale, you probably knew that name. Her father, Victor Davenport, was the real estate developer behind several luxury communities across Arizona. Lillian worked as a senior consultant in her father's firm, Davenport Urban Development. Confident, articulate, impossibly composed in public. For 2 years, we looked like the kind of couple people quietly envied. Elegant dinners, weekend trips to Sedona, fundraisers where people assumed our future was already planned. But perfect relationships rarely collapse in one moment. They usually crack slowly. 6 months earlier, something had started to change. Lillian became distant. She answered messages hours later. She canceled dinners with vague explanations about late meetings. And whenever I asked if something was wrong, she smiled politely and said everything was fine. But small details started adding up. Her phone screen turning away when I walked into the room. Late-night calls that ended the moment I entered. Conversations that felt rehearsed instead of natural. Still, I never accused her of anything. Not because I trusted blindly, but because I prefer facts to suspicions. And 3 nights before that conversation in the kitchen, I finally got one. It happened by accident. I was sitting in my office reviewing quarterly investment reports when an email notification appeared on my laptop. The subject line read, "Reservation confirmation, the Monarch Lounge." The message wasn't meant for me. It was forwarded from Lillian's email account to someone else. Normally, I would have ignored it. But one detail caught my attention. The reservation time. Thursday night, 8:30 p.m. The same night Lillian had told me she was attending a board strategy meeting. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a client dinner. But curiosity has a quiet way of growing. So I searched the reservation system of the Monarch Lounge. Prescott Financial happened to manage part of the resort's investment portfolio, which meant I had temporary access to internal booking logs. And that's when I saw it. The reservation was not for a corporate dinner. It was a private table for 2, and the guest name listed beside Lillian Davenport's reservation was someone I recognized immediately. Daniel Mercer. Daniel Mercer was not just any name. He was the new regional investment director at Prescott Financial. My company, my department, and my direct competitor for a promotion that had been quietly discussed for months. That discovery alone could have meant many things. Business, networking, negotiation. But the next detail changed everything. The reservation included a note. Anniversary champagne requested. Anniversary. I stared at the screen for a long time. Because Lillian and I didn't have an anniversary that week. Which meant that dinner wasn't meant for me. I closed my laptop slowly. Then I did something that surprised even me. I didn't confront her. I didn't call Daniel Mercer. I didn't start an argument based on a suspicion. Instead, I waited. Because sometimes the truth reveals itself more clearly when people believe you already trust them. Thursday night arrived 2 days later. Lillian dressed carefully before leaving the apartment. She wore the black silk dress I had bought her in Sedona the previous year. "You'll be home late?" I asked casually. "Probably," she said. "Strategy meetings always run long." I nodded. "Good luck tonight." She smiled and kissed my cheek before leaving. The moment the door closed, the apartment fell silent. For a while, I simply stood there thinking. Then I picked up my phone and drove downtown. Not to follow her, not to spy, just to confirm one thing. When I walked in the Monarch Lounge an hour later, the place was glowing with soft golden light and quiet jazz music. And in the far corner of the room, sitting close together at a candlelit table, were Lillian Davenport and Daniel Mercer. They weren't discussing business. They were laughing, leaning toward each other in the easy way people do when they already know how the evening will end. I watched them for less than 10 seconds. Then I turned around and left. Because sometimes confirmation is all you need. 3 days later, Lillian stood in our kitchen and said she didn't love me anymore. Which brings us back to that moment. The moment I said, okay, before we continue, think about this for a second. If you discovered something like that about someone you loved, would you confront them immediately? Or would you wait and see how the truth revealed itself? There's no easy answer, but the choice often says a lot about who we are under pressure. When I walked out of the apartment that night, I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity, because people rarely confess betrayal unless they believe they already have control of the situation. What Lillian didn't know was that the situation had changed days earlier. The following Monday morning, Prescott Financial held its quarterly executive meeting. Daniel Mercer entered the conference room with the same confident smile he always wore. The room included 8 senior partners and 2 board members. About 15 minutes into the meeting, our managing director, Nolan Prescott, began discussing the upcoming regional director appointment, the position Daniel and I were competing for. Nolan looked around the table. Before we move forward, he said calmly, "There's a compliance matter we need to address." Daniel frowned slightly. "What kind of compliance matter?" Nolan opened a file. Undisclosed personal relationships between employees and external stakeholders. The room became quiet. Daniel shifted in his chair. "What does that have to do with me?" Nolan turned the folder toward him. Inside was documentation from the Monarch Lounge reservation. The same confirmation email that had appeared on my laptop. Prescott Financial had strict disclosure rules regarding relationships that could influence internal promotions or negotiations, especially when one party had connections to major real estate developers like Victor Davenport. Daniel's face slowly lost color as he read the documents. "I can explain this," he said quietly. Nolan folded his hands calmly. "You'll have that opportunity with HR." Then he looked at me. "Adrian, thank you for bringing the matter forward through the appropriate channels." Daniel turned toward me in shock. "You reported this?" I held his gaze calmly. "Yes." The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Daniel Mercer was placed under immediate review. 2 weeks later, he resigned quietly. The promotion he had been competing for was offered to someone else. Someone who had followed company policy exactly as required. Me. 3 days after that announcement, I received a message from Lillian Davenport. "Can we talk?" We met at a quiet cafe in Old Town Scottsdale. She looked different somehow. Less confident. More uncertain. "I heard about Daniel," she said softly. "I imagine you did." She studied me carefully. "You knew before I told you, didn't you?" "Yes." Her voice dropped. "So when I said I didn't love you, you already knew everything." I nodded once. For a moment, she looked down at her coffee. Then she asked the question that had probably been bothering her for weeks. "Why didn't you fight for us?" I thought about the answer carefully before speaking. "Because by the time someone says they don't love you anymore," I said quietly, "the fight has usually already been lost." She didn't argue with that. She just sat there silently. And in that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't revenge. It's simply stepping out of a situation where someone believed you would stay no matter what.